Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Echoes of War. I'm Craig from the Pacific War Channel, joined here by my co-host Garev. How are you?
Hey Greg, great to be here. And I guess continuing from last time, we are picking up with your favorite general of all time.
Yes, the last episode, which is I would almost call it kind of like a prequel episode to the series because it does you don't necessarily have to watch the first episode to explain. The first episode focused specifically on how Douglas MacArthur made a blunder of the defense of the Philippines. Today's the actual Japanese invasion of the Philippines. There's going to be some crossover, but you didn't have to watch a previous episode. You can just jump right into this one. That's going to be a lot of fun, and we're still going to shit talk MacArthur a little bit. He's not going to get away with anything in this one. But before we jump into this, I just want to say to all the audio listeners, we're currently using a brand new software. That's Riverside. It's dramatically improved the quality because my God, the quality with Zoom, who tried to charge me $250 without telling me, I hate Zoom, not worth it. We've improved the quality. There's going to be a lot of maps for this one. In the future, we might do full-on clips. We're going to have portraits of individuals. It's really, I think, it's worth your while to try and check us out on YouTube because we're trying to make this more of, yeah, I don't know what you want to call it, documentary style kind of piece for each episode. And before we start the episode, I also want to say if you'd like to further support the channel, please consider checking out the YouTube membership or the Patreon account on www.patreon.com/Pacific War Channel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, which is about 28 episodes and ongoing. You get early access to all the content I make and voting rights to the subjects I will tackle next. And I will also say the audio quality is going to be dramatically improved because I can hear Garev clicking incessantly in the background, but none of you will hear that. And I'm like, I had to say something because I'm like, oh my God, the amount of clicking I'm hearing, I'm like, Jesus. But yeah.
My bad. It's just called I can't afford my RuneScape XP waste.
Oh my God, RuneScape. Jeez, that's a callback. But it goes to show multitasking is being done. But today, we're jumping into the Japanese invasion of the Philippines, which is happening simultaneously with everything else that's going on in the Asia Pacific. So we're talking about the attack on Pearl Harbor, the invasion of Malaya, Thailand, you name it. This is all happening. The first few weeks of the Pacific War is absolutely insane from a planning point of view, from a logistical point of view. It's really incredible. So
I mean, you couldn't say that any better. You have like one major task force that attacked Pearl Harbor. Force is going to the like Wake Island and several other smaller islands. Then you
mhm.
have multi-division attempt like invasions, like Philippines and I think at this moment Malaysia. You have a fighting going on in Singapore. I mean, sorry, Hong Kong, and all of it is to lead to the ultimate objective.
Absolutely. So, last episode, we specifically talked about how General Douglas MacArthur blundered two specific things: War Plan Orange 3 and the Clark Field disaster, as it became known. Now we're going to jump right into it. So, the Japanese invasion of the Philippines, which was going to begin with a significant airstrike aimed at neutralizing the American air power, and this is going to be at certain air bases. And at this point, I think I'm going to bring up our first photo. It's gonna be a little wonky because it's actually out of a book, but I assure you this is one of the best photos that is available to us because a lot of the photos don't really look well. I find this one's got just about everything. It looks pretty good. So there's quite a few airfields available to the Americans in the Philippines. There's one at Iba, Clark, Nielsen, Nichols, and Del Carmen. They're scattered about. A lot of them are on Luzon though. So, obviously, attaining air superiority was crucial for the success of the operation. And following the airstrikes, the Japanese planned several amphibious landings on the northern around the northern airfields. So there's actually one on Bataan Island, and you actually can't see it on this map. But if you look all the way at the north, especially where it says December the 10th, 1941, Bataan Island is somewhere up there. It's one of the, I think it's the northernmost of the Philippines. It's followed by other islands like Vigan, Apati, Legazpi. There's airfields in all these areas. And there would also be air assaults against Del Monte. Once they've achieved dominance in the skies, the Japanese would then start their amphibious assault. That's going to be launched primarily in Luzon and Mindanao, focusing around
I think
Baguio.
one more. I think one thing we should also remember at this particular point of the war, the Japanese Air Force owns the American and British Air Forces in the region. It's not
Yes,
even close.
it's enormous and it's superior. I mean, it's not overwhelmingly superior in scale of technology, but the Americans certainly are not going to have much to play with for quite a while. And they have a lot of issues.
True.
For example, the torpedoes for their torpedo bombers are completely useless. 1 in 10 would actually explode. So you can consider all the Avengers kind of useless for about 3 years of the war.
I
The
remember from my Midway documentary, it was actually talking about how they don't want to be a torpedo bomber because you're just pretty much a meat shield.
Oh yeah, and they had very rudimentary ways that they would attack the ship. So they would go like at very slow, low altitude, very straightforward. Barely managing hammer and anvil tactics, which is something the Japanese were very proficient in, especially the Kyotobutai.
Definitely, right now the experience is definitely in Japan's favor for their aviators.
Yeah, it's not going to be hard to get air superiority. And let's be honest, this is the Philippines. They have a formidable air force, but it couldn't compare to the Japanese. It's just too close to the backyard of Japan. But once they've achieved air supremacy, they're going to start landing in Luzon and Mindanao. And for Mindanao, they're going to be focusing on a place it's called Davao. After securing the beachheads, Japanese forces would
Well,
then
Goring, this
advance.
is how you actually gain air supremacy on an enemy island.
Yes, that's something Goring wasn't able to do, even though he had
To be fair, the
arguably.
British. To be fair, the British did have a far superior defense system, but it's like this is the pot shot.
Yeah, you want to give credence to the radar system and everything for the Battle of Britain on the side of the British, but it's not as if Goring could not have won. Even with the advantage for the British, the reason why the British had the advantage was because the tactics the Germans were using allowed them to overcome them using the radar. That's the
I
problem.
mean,
But yeah,
yeah, I think it was at one point he was telling his ME 109s to slow down from their top speed to just escort the bombers, and then
oh my
they're
god,
at a
yeah.
disadvantage. All right, I think I digress. I'm sorry.
Goring, as we famously put as one of the worst air marshals of World War II. There you go. But after securing the beachheads, the Japanese forces were going to advance to strategic locations. This will include actually many places, but I guess you could say most crucially, it's going to be the capital, Manila. There's also San Fernando, Ligian, Davao, Cagayan del Oro, Yolo, Leyte, Corregidor Island will be the very last one. And to describe Corregidor Island, here, let me go to my little map. It's really small. Oh, I zoomed out. It's, I don't know if you can even see my cursor, but if you look at the Bataan Peninsula
I guess you could
over
just
here,
say where Kindley is written.
where
That's
Kidney is
probably the
exactly. So you're going to imagine it's a tiny island, but it is absolutely formidable with defenses. It's got some anti-aircraft weapons as bunkers. It's got the works full field hospital, everything. It's made to withstand a huge siege. So it's going to be a nightmare to take. You actually
so.
have to
Can
conquer
we
Bataan,
call
which
it the
they,
Gibraltar of the Philippines?
yeah, you can call it the Gibraltar of the Philippines. You actually need to set up your artillery at like the bottom of the Bataan Peninsula to start firing upon it to soften it up, and it probably won't soften up much because everyone will be underground. Now, the task of invading the Philippines has been assigned to the Imperial Japanese 14th Army, commanded by one Lieutenant General Homa Masaharu. An interesting character amongst the Japanese because I would say he's one of the gentler generals. We'll call him.
That's
He was
pretty. That's a pretty subjective term.
Yeah. He was known at, well, I mean, amongst the Japanese, it's like, oh, it's like saying, oh, of the generals in the Mongol horde, he killed the least amount of people. They kind of, but General Homa was known as the poet general. He was an amateur playwright. I know it's interesting. He's also a painter, and he led a pro-British American faction within the Imperial Japanese Army. Quite niche, you know, to be part of that. He was considered a very esteemed and cultured individual by his peers. He had spent 8 years in Britain, so it's obviously where he becomes a bit of an Anglo lover. Sorry, not phobe. Where he even served in the British Expeditionary Force in France in 1918. He earned a military cross for his service. So he saw some action, on the Western Front. His deep respect and understanding of Western culture led to his appointment as a military attaché to Britain in the 30s, and he was quite proficient in English. Now, he demonstrated his capabilities as a commander during the Second Sino-Japanese War, and he famously cautioned against the violent aftermath of the Nanking Massacre, stating publicly this quote, "Unless peace is achieved immediately, it will be disastrous." His stance resulted in his removal from the front lines and subsequent reassignment as the commander of the Taiwan Army District from 1940 to 1941. That's a huge demotion, by the way. Unlike many other of his counterparts, Homa garnered criticism from his superiors for being gentler towards the enemy, further solidifying this reputation as the poet general. So it's kind of a slight against him. You got to remember the Imperial Japanese Army in the Showa era is, I don't know how else to describe it, evil. They're brutal. They brutalize each other. There's an enormous issue with abuse, all the way from the top of the file going down. You want to be as cutthroat as possible to be in this military. They believe, yeah,
I think I would just say compared to like interwar British generals and officers, which were expected to talk, about cricket, politics, everything else. This just feels like the complete polar opposite of like an atmosphere for an army commander.
absolutely. Now, supporting Hama's 14th Army was going to be the 5th Army Air Force, headed by Lieutenant General Obata Hideyoshi, and he's going to have about 183 short range aircraft. Additionally, the 3rd Fleet, under the command of Vice Admiral Takahashi Ibo, provided further support with 5 heavy cruisers, 5 light cruisers, 29 destroyers, and 358 long range aircraft from the 11th Air Fleet. So that's a lot of it's a lot of aircraft. It's honestly a very impressive force. Takahashi's role in the Philippines was going to be pivotal because he was going to be focusing on hunting down and neutralizing what was known as the U.S. Asiatic Fleet, which would all, and he'd also, of course, provide support for the actual naval landings. Something the Japanese were terrible at, by the way. Very, very not proficient amphibious assaults. They'd never had a proper doctrine for it. Even in the China theater, they did terribly when it came to this. But I desist. And he would be in charge of safeguarding troop convoys. Something the Japanese were completely incapable of, but they're very lucky that the Americans are not capable of doing anything at this point. Now, the United States famously decrypted many Japanese codes prior to the outbreak of the war, allowing them to intercept significant amounts of, signal traffic. By November the 27th, the intercepted communications indicated that war was imminent. In response to the alarming intelligence, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, General Marshall at the time, dispatched a message to all commands, including those in the Philippines, stating this quote, "Japanese future action unpredictable, but hostile action possible at any moment. If hostilities cannot be avoided, the United States desires that Japan commit the first overt act. This policy should not be construed as restricting you to a course of action that might jeopardize your defense. Should hostilities occur, you will carry out the tasks assigned in Rainbow Plan 5, so far as they pertain to Japan." So I will repeat to the audience, in the previous episode, we actually kind of scrutinized this quote for, we dug into it. It's very important. It has a lot to do with how Douglas MacArthur will be blundering up what his actual orders are to do. And Rainbow Plan 5 does include much of what is War Plan Orange 3. You can think of them as one and the same. They're not, but it's just easier to think of it that way for the general audience. Now, despite the Philippines being considered a primary target in the event of war with Japan, General Douglas MacArthur failed to take significant measures to place his command on full war alert. As MacArthur was preparing to leave for an overseas liaison mission, his general, or I guess you could, something like his little marshal for his Air Force there, General Brereton, warned him that the B-17 bombers stationed at Clark Field were within range of Japanese bombers from Formosa. For those who don't know, that's Taiwan today. Brereton suggested relocating the B-17s to a more southern airbase, perhaps on the island of Mindanao, a proposal which MacArthur concurred. Nevertheless, though, by December the 8th, 17 of the 35 B-17s currently at the Philippines remained on Clark Field. There was actually a lot more B-17s that were supposed to be coming in, but they never made it in time. Now, on December the 3rd, MacArthur positioned his forces in anticipation of a Japanese attack. However, he diverged from his standing orders, which were War Plan Orange 3. Before people start screaming, it is supposed to be Rainbow Plan 5, but more or less it's War Plan Orange 3 that he was adhering to. The still official policy, opting instead for his own strategy. MacArthur's approach, which he termed an active defense, aimed to defeat the Japanese forces on the beaches. Now, before I continue, I want to see if I have a map that might share
That's
a little bit
actually,
more.
I mean, I'm gonna, in theory, that's definitely a much more sound strategy if you can execute it, obviously.
Of course, MacArthur's strategy was he did not want to give up the Philippines, but the United States orders were they were going to be giving up the Philippines. They had no illusions that they could hold them because it was simple math. The
No,
Japanese were
I
far
guess
too
what I
close.
meant was the best defense against an amphibious assault is obviously at the landing points
Of course, yes.
from that
I'm gonna
angle.
Yeah, I'm just gonna zoom out. Now I know the quality of this picture. This is why I'm not using this picture as much. It's not as good, but it kind of shows you the full scale of actions and how MacArthur has placed an enormous amount of units all over the place. And that's kind of the point, because he's not supposed to be doing this. But he wanted to go with his active defense, so aimed at defeating them at the beaches before they can establish a foothold. Something that absolutely is probable if he had the means of doing so, but he does not
And
really
that's
have the means to
true.
do so. Yeah.
True, I guess it's not like, at least, even the Germans at Normandy, at least he still had some amounts of the Atlantic Wall there.
Yeah. I mean, given Rommel got to do what he wanted to do, you couldn't like there was no way they were stopping. There was no way they were actually going to stop Overlord from achieving its objectives. But
They would have just made them, they would have made them pay a lot more.
absolutely, yeah, they could have provided a better defense. But anyways, MacArthur he wanted to implement obviously his plan, so he established three main defensive forces: the Northern Luzon Force under General Jonathan Wainwright. So, for those who might not know their Philippines geography, the large island you're looking at directly in the middle, all of that is Luzon, and the northern part of it is Northern Luzon. Now, the Southern Luzon force was under Major General George Parker, so that's the southern part of it. And then there's going to be the Visayan Mindanao force under General Brigadier William Sharp. Can I zoom out a little bit more? So you can see
Yeah, you can see a
Mindoro, you can see
Mindoro.
a little bit of these islands here in the south, so that makes up the Visayan and Mindanao parts. See, do I have another map that kind of explains this? They're all kind of the same maps, unfortunately. But for those who are audio only listeners, if you're not aware, the Philippines is an amalgamation of many islands. Some are quite large, like the largest being Luzon, it's the main island. And then there's some slightly bulkier islands like Visayan, Mindanao, and such, Mindoro, for example. And yeah, MacArthur has decided to place major units across all of the significantly large islands. Now, I'm going to actually switch back over to the map I like because it just looks better. Bear with me, audio listeners. Here we go. This beautiful map that's just, there's not too much going on. Oh, actually, excuse me. That was a map I will be showing in the future that presents the lines of defense. Here we are. This guy. Even though it's straight out of a textbook, I find this map is much better. Oh, and sorry, and this map actually shows Mindanao's clearly outlined here. Let's zoom in. So you got Mindanao, you got an island I'm not going to name. Oh man, every time I did the podcast, Panay, Mindoro, Cebu, Yol, Leyte, all these
Leyte.
places.
One
Leyte,
day we're
Visayan.
gonna, one day we're gonna attempt the Battle of Leyte Gulf.
That's
One
going to
day.
be a multi-episode series,
One
and
day. Come on.
after our
Yeah,
Jutland
it's.
episode, I'm like scared. It's going to be a difficult one.
I mean, Chatlam was 2 and 3 episodes if you include the build up.
Yeah. But I think the way the YouTube channel Operations Room did Let It Golf was actually one of the best ways to do it.
Oh, it was.
Not knocking on KNG. Our format was week by week, and we were constrained to that. And I didn't really like the way we did Let It, but whatever.
I mean, the operations room that was like, it was quite gripping to
It's
just,
great. I
especially,
really like their channel. Yeah.
and not to mention the way they just described the death of the Musashi. Like that ship took a beating.
Not to dwell too much into the future, but for those who are patrons or YouTube members, thank you very much. Every cent that goes into that goes to my new animator. It is no fault of the animator. This is just the way the field is. They're very expensive. My episodes can't even cover a tenth of the cost for the animator, but we're going to be tackling pretty soon the Marco Polo Bridge incident, and I'm simultaneously going to do Pearl Harbor. and I'm going to do the China Theater, the Second Sino-Japanese War, simultaneously with the Pacific War of 1941 to 1945, because I think my audience is frustrated and wants to get into the meat and potatoes of these campaigns. So some exciting stuff is happening, and the Battle of Leyte Gulf, whenever I do it, that's going to be interesting. From an animation point of view, madness, absolute madness.
Fair
Yeah.
enough.
So to execute his plan, MacArthur dispersed his troops and especially their war equipment thinly across the 9 major Philippine islands, violating a cardinal principle of military strategy. He mistakenly
Concentration
believed
of force.
exactly. He mistakenly believed that the Japanese would not attack the Philippines before April of 1942, and he
Which
had no
was
real.
what you mentioned.
Yeah, in the previous episode, he had a rationale for that. It was even in modern age, invasions typically don't take place, or wars for that matter, until a country is strategically firm. And he thought because of the weather, so how hot it would be, and given certain harvest times, because Japanese would need to have their foodstuffs ready, it wouldn't happen for this time. And he actually had a decent rationale, but the Japanese attacked anyways in December. But he would have no viable strategy to defend all the islands should the attack occur sooner, let's say early December of 1941. This extensive dispersion meant the vital war materials were scattered amongst all the various units, rendering a coordinated defense nearly impossible. If an attack occurred, War Plan Orange 3 stated that everybody had to move to the Bataan Peninsula. So I'm just going to go to my map now. Right over here where it says Lubiao is like kind of the entrance into this little foothold that goes here to where Corregidor is at the south. So that's Bataan Peninsula. For lack of better words, the entire American strategy is to prolong the conquest of the Philippines for as long as possible. So they were going to take all their units who were supposed to be just in central Luzon, do a little delaying action, and go into Bataan. And then they would hold up in Bataan for as long as they could. It's a decent strategy. It goes all the way back to 1908.
Just a question.
Hmm?
Was the hope that it would hold out till maybe the American forces would build themselves up in strength to come back, or
Yeah.
was it just meant to be a permanent delaying action and then eventually surrender?
So the original plan for War Plan Orange 3 was introduced literally by Teddy Roosevelt. He was kind of the guy that got to get the ball rolling after the Russo-Japanese War. By I think it was 1908, when there was concrete kind of plans coming out there, that what you said was the plan. Hold out for about 6 months, and then the U.S. Pacific Fleet would be assembled, probably with assets from the Atlantic, and they will go across the Pacific, do a decisive battle, defeat the Japanese, and rescue the Philippines. Thus,
So
not
it was
even
supposed to
losing the
be,
Philippines. Yeah.
so it was supposed to, in a theoretical sense, be a full-time holdout.
Yeah, but by the war plan obviously changed by 1941. By that point, they knew that it was an impossibility to hold the conquest back. It would be conquered. The plan was to just delay them, because obviously you want to hold the enemy for as long as possible, all the assets, because they envisioned they would be fighting possibly 2 different foes, Germany and Japan, for example, or the situation would be quite different. And they did not believe they would be able to mount a decisive naval battle until probably a year into the war.
Fair
Sorry,
enough, yeah.
just got getting a, excuse me, audience, whatever that might be. I was getting a call, but I'm not going to take that. I am not working today. I took the day off, so I'm not answering that.
And it's very good.
Yeah. If the attack occurred, moving the equipment to Bataan, as recommended by War Plan Orange 3, as I mentioned, it was basically a massive delaying action to get to Bataan. And the idea originally was all of the units would be stationed in central Luzon, so quite close to Bataan, arguably. Most of the war material, more than 50%, would already be stationed in Bataan, not even with them, so they were not even, it's not necessary for them to carry it, but they would have a very comprehensive plan, short distance, concentrated forces, easy delaying action, easy to get all the war materials to Bataan. This is not what the case would be because of MacArthur. Due to his strategy, it's going to take quite a longer time to move the supplies. Additionally, MacArthur harbored a naive belief that Admiral Hart's fleet would be working in conjunction with the air forces, and they'd be capable of repelling the majority of the impending Japanese invasion force, the warships and the transports. This is pretty insane because Hart didn't have anything significant to fight the Japanese with. He had submarines, but as we will find out, their torpedoes don't really work. Despite that, he would not have been able to do too much. And the Air Forces could have done some damage to Japan, but they were not able to because of another mess up by MacArthur. We'll get into that. Now, on December the 8th, as homeless forces are departing from Hamajima en route to Guam, because there's other places being attacked, by the way, and the Philippines for that matter, Japanese aircraft were sent off from Formosa at 2:30 a.m. on December the 8th to target the Philippine airfields. It's also important to note there's a time zone difference, from the Philippines to places like Hawaii and the United States. So this is all kind of happening simultaneously. So you should be assuming this is happening in conjunction with the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, hours, their scheduled departure time on Formosa is a little bit delayed because there's a large fog. Hours pass with no sign of improvement, leading senior Japanese commanders to start panicking because they have a very strict timetable to do all this, and they believe that the Americans can attack Formosa with an air raid. Meanwhile, the Americans, were likely figuring out what's going on given Pearl Harbor is being attacked. And so the Japanese are basically freaking out, thinking that their aircraft on Formosa are about to be bombed by B-17s. But this is not the case. Excuse me. At about 12:35 p.m., 27 Japanese high-level bombers spotted the large gleaming B-17s under the bright sun, followed by another 27 bombers and 35 Zero fighters at the edge of the airfield at Clark. Now, a New Mexico National Guardsman who was there, he was enjoying his lunch, was talking to one Sergeant Dwayne Davis when he remarked, "Oh, here comes the Navy." Another soldier looked up and said, "Why are they dropping tinfoil?" And a third man, who was probably also eating his lunch, yelled back, "That's not tinfoil. Those are goddamn Japs." So these men who are at Clark Field Airport are seeing what seems to be a Japanese airstrike upon their airfield. I'm actually going to switch pictures because I do have something that just kind of showcases a little bit of the attacks and gives a bit of numbers and times for the audience's sake. So the men at the airfield, they're scrambling their P-40 fighters who are being attacked on the ground, by the way, and they're attempting to launch intercept as the air raid sirens are blaring. The high-level bombers begin to form V-shaped formations, unleashing a torrent of bombs. Many of the ground crews, this is their first experience with using their anti-aircraft guns, and they're watching in frustration as the flak and burst are falling below the intended targets. The bombs are cascading across the airfield and surrounding trenches. Suddenly, the bombers, having dropped their payloads, they soar away, leaving a jarring silence in their wake. One Corporal Durwood Brooks staggered towards the flight line in a daze. Bombs had just gone off. He's witnessing bodies and limbs strewn across the field. And amongst the carnage, he spots a Polish friend of his, a 19-year-old, in a slit trench. A freak accident had caused an explosive bullet to blow him up, leaving him looking almost transparent. Men began to emerge from the trenches. They look like dazed zombies, momentarily numb. They're hearing the groans of the wounded around them. The buildings are ablaze. There's a dark smoke churning from the oil dumps across the field. By the stroke of luck, a few B-17s do remain untouched. Then the thunder of engines fill the air again as 35 Zero fighters dive down, strafing the B-17s and all of the ground-level soldiers, who've been assured by their commanders that there was no such thing as a Japanese fighter plane. Got to remember, at this point, especially for the men at Pearl Harbor, they're under these racist, I'm going to call it racist beliefs that the Japanese just copy whatever the Americans or the British do. They can't really make warships that well. They certainly can't make aircraft that well. They're not good pilots. They're very incapable.
And I think there was also the capable that they can execute like these complex military operations.
Yes. And there's actually there was also racial attitudes that they couldn't fly at dawn or dusk because they had problems with their eyesight. They're all myopic, is the term. I'm not going to get into it. It's a really crazy racist thing that goes into phrenology of all things. It's 19th century babble. But yeah, so the Americans are getting to witness that the Japanese are very well trained, especially the first few months of the war, very good at this, and they're going to do some havoc. Chaos erupts as one B-17 explodes when tracer fires start to ignite its gas tanks. This releases black clouds of smoke. Men are ripped apart by strafing gunfire. By the end of the assault, only 3 B-17s are left. Clark Field is in ruins. One fighter pilot named Don Steele described the devastation as such. There was a beautiful Clark Field. It was all in flames. Every building on the aerodrome was on fire. Large columns of smoke rising 18,000 feet, slick and shining B-17s, which we were all so proud of, had just received, we just received them from the States, were all sitting on the ground blazing in a desperate dogfight over Clark Field because some actually managed to get up in the air. There were 6 P-40s, and they were trying to intercept the incoming Japanese, and they claimed 3 kills. However, the losses were devastating. 2 U.S. pilots were killed, including Lieutenant Herbert Ellis, who claimed 2 of his kills before being hit and set ablaze. He bailed out of his plane, but was gunned down as he was parachuting.
Damn,
So,
that's
war crime, by the way. Yeah.
That's extreme.
Yeah. The air war with Japan was proving to be anything but a gentleman's affair. It would not be. The Pacific War was a grueling and dirty war. Simultaneously, Iba Airfield was struck by 54 Betty bombers, and nearly all but 4 of the P-40 squadrons were caught while landing. At this time, they were destroyed. Similar to the attack on Clark, the buildings were ignited, the aircraft were obliterated on the ground or in the air by the Zero fighters. When the Zeros followed up their bombing by strafing the ground aircraft, they were met with about 12 P-40s, but the P-40 stood little chance. By the afternoon, half of the Far East Air Force had been destroyed, granting the Japanese air supremacy for their invasion. Back on Formosa, Japanese soldiers were bracing themselves with gas masks, anticipating B-17s were going to rain down chemical warfare on them, actually. However, those attacks never materialized. Douglas MacArthur's biographer, later on, described his demeanor upon receiving the news and stated that his, quote, mental condition at this time was verging on catatonic. He looked gray, ill, and exhausted. After the war, when accused of failing to obey orders pertaining to Rainbow Plan 5, MacArthur defended himself by stating this: the United States desired that Japan commit the first overt act. My orders were explicit not to initiate hostilities against the Japanese. However, this defense is it's bullshit. It's a complete lie, because the Japanese had not only attacked Pearl Harbor, they actually had attacked the Philippines prior. Yeah.
And even if you take the wording of General Marshall's, they said that you have to also take into the consideration of what your command requires, and if needed, then be prepared to strike first, right? I mean, that's how I was also able to interpret it, the wording.
Exactly. So all of the blame was shifted away from MacArthur onto Barrington, because he was in charge of the Air Forces, who was screaming the whole time he wanted to lift them up. But again, for that whole story, the previous episode, we went into depth as to what actually happened.
The poor guy waited for 5 hours for permission.
Yep. What was, it's very reminiscent of, it's almost considered like, I guess you could call it the Pearl Harbors of the Philippines. But you have to think about the context of all this. In a single day, 2 of the 3 most formidable deterrents to Japan were neutralized. The U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, MacArthur's B-17 strike force in the Philippines, and then, of course, there was Britain's Force Z just outside of Singapore that had gone down all at the same time, basically.
That's actually pretty impressive timing.
Yep, and they all share a unique trait. They were all blunders in their own rights. They had massive blunders, but yeah.
And last thing, all were destroyed by air power.
Yes, yeah, all were destroyed by air power. And I mean, when it comes to Force Z, we're talking about larger bombers who no one thought could hit ships. But yeah, they did. So now the Japanese are going to start invading. So 2 troop ships landed about 490. And I know people hate hearing Japanese Marines. They're the SNLF, but for general audience sake, it's easier to call Marines. They're not really Marines. We're going to call Marines on Bataan
You can just say
Island.
the naval infantry.
Naval infantry. And I'm going to open back up
Because
the map that I
for
like.
me, Marines are the Astartes.
Yeah. Here's my map. And unfortunately, Bataan is not on this map. But at the very, very top, it's a very small island north of Luzon. That's the way you can think of it.
So they've just breached like the northern barriers of the Philippines, you could say.
Exactly. And they're just finding the weakest place to just position men, basically. They swiftly take control of its very small airfield. It's not very significant. And in response, Admiral Hart enacts Rainbow Plan 5 as pertaining to his naval force. And he issues for the Asiatic Fleet to withdraw and join the British and Dutch forces around Borneo. This is going to, as we actually spoke in some other episodes, the ABDCOM command is going to be formed over there. Now, 13 dive bombers and 9 fighters commenced bombing and strafing missions over Davao. Meanwhile, 54 bombers unleashed devastation upon Cavite. And as Lieutenant John Buckley lamented, they flanged Cavite and her naval yard. There isn't any word. Here was the only American naval base in the Orient beyond Pearl Harbor, pounded into bloody rubbish.
Ouch.
So, everywhere's getting hit. In rapid succession, 27 bombers, 36 fighters also targeted Nielsen Field, while 18 fighters strafed Nichols Field. And additionally, some bombers also started to attack Manila, the capital of the Philippines, just to remind everyone. Over the next few days, the sole remaining aircraft were just a handful of P-40s and some B-17s that had survived because they had been relocated south prior to the assault on Clark Field. Douglas MacArthur found himself, without a naval force, without an air force to protect the Philippines, and now all he could rely upon was his ground troops. That ain't a good situation. The Japanese had landed on Bataan. They took control of its airfield. Now they had about 6 transport ships that were capable of carrying about 2,000 Japanese soldiers each. They're going to be en route to designated landing targets in northern Luzon. Now, General Homa orchestrated a series of surprise landings across northern Luzon, fully aware that the American forces were dispersed across 9 major islands. His strategy aimed to encircle the American troops, cutting off their retreat to Manila. Because the Japanese I don't know if the Japanese were completely aware of War Plan Orange 3, but they were generally aware of how the Americans would defend the Philippines. I'm just going to move this map up to northern Luzon, all these areas here. All right. Once the landing...
Was it also something that you attack the capital or like something very symbolic?
Mm-hmm.
It's something that would undermine the confidence of the local population.
Of course. One landing occurred at dawn near Apati. It's on the map. Okay. Over at the top northern part, I guess you could call it one of the most significant cities in the north, enabling a surprise attack upon the airfield. They weren't expecting to be attacked at Apati. It was captured completely unopposed. There was not significant forces there. Within hours, they also seized Gonzaga and Camiguan Island. Now, Gonzaga, it's not shown on the map. It's a little bit northeast of Apati, and Camiguan Island's a little bit north than those small little islands you see on the map. With Apati secured, the Japanese now had an airfield from which they could launch further strikes against the main island. An
actually usable airfield.
Yeah, exactly. Another landing force disembarked at Vigan, but this time they were met by some B-17s with P-40 escorts. In what would turn out to be the final coordinated actions of the Far East Air Force, they managed to damage 2 Japanese transports, the Ogawa Maru and the Takeo Maru, as well as the destroyer Murasame and the cruiser Naka. They managed to also sink a minesweeper, the W-10. Most importantly, they forced some of the landing troops to retreat back to the transports. However, the Japanese simply regrouped and they landed again the following day, just about 4 miles south of their targets. Those troops did not retreat successfully. Those troops that did not retreat successfully captured the airfield at Vigan.
Psst. Hey you ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself?
Uh-oh, you live in Japan, and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, Season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it. Without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
FBI, open up!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private Internet Access gives you more privacy features than any other software and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private Internet Access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private Internet Access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use Private Internet Access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for Private Internet Access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/The Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video.
Douglas MacArthur was livid upon hearing these reports of the initial Japanese landings, and he blamed Major General Jonathan Wainwright, which is something he's actually going to do a lot. And Wainwright did not deserve any of this, for what he deemed incompetence in executing MacArthur's active defense plan, the hit them at the beaches plan there. Consequently, Wainwright became a significant scapegoat for MacArthur's shortcomings. Yeah. Compounding the situation.
Not to mention, a certain admiral is going to get a lot of stick now.
Oh, of course. It's never MacArthur's fault. It's everyone else. And MacArthur loved to blame the Navy, eh? So
I guess it's a miracle Halsey and him got along for so long.
That is one of the craziest stories, that Halsey and MacArthur liked each other, it seems, and that's wild, because MacArthur treated the United States Navy as if they were more of his enemy than the Japanese. So it goes without saying, it's an interesting relationship. But yeah, compounding the situation, which is bad, there's questions regarding MacArthur's mental state. Historian John Gordon would characterize MacArthur's reaction to the unfolding disaster as delusional in scope. In a radio communication to General Marshall in Washington on December the 10th, MacArthur urged for a, quote, immediate attack on Japan from the north. A golden opportunity exists for a masterstroke while the enemy is engaged and is overextended in their air efforts against us. Just like
what ships?
Yeah, I know.
What ships, man?
Exactly. So on December the 12th, another Japanese landing, which is departing from Palo Island, disembarks at Legazpi. Where is that on? Right here. So south.
Yeah.
Legazpi. I probably mispronounced the one. I apologize, Legazpi. This attack was intended as a diversion to draw out MacArthur's forces, which actually is going to succeed, but none would respond at this time. The Japanese took the city and the airfield unopposed. The Togero airfield, just south of Apari, was quickly captured, placing the last major U.S. airfield at Del Monte, and now they're going to be in jeopardy. So Barrington requested permission to relocate the remaining 14 B-17s to Darwin in Australia. MacArthur agreed to this. During this time, Clark Lee of the Associated Press, who was in Manila, began reporting for the public, and he declared, the Japanese army is as ill-uniformed, the Japanese army is an ill-uniformed, untrained mass of young boys between the ages of 15 and 18, equipped with small caliber guns and driven forward by desperate determination to advance or die. Their .25 caliber rifles and machine gun bullets could not even kill a man. They're no damned good on the ground. This is the dumbest shit I've ever heard, but yeah. So they're like kids with hunting rifles, basically.
They're like, oh yeah, this is not even a bother.
By the way, just to press something, the Japanese, being one of the smallest combatants of World War II in physicality, had the heaviest rifles and the largest bayonets, and it's kind of like the opposite. I mean, I wouldn't say the Japanese had great guns per se, but no, they're not .25. They're not going out there with
If I'm
riggers.
not mistaken, standard rifles in the world at this time were like at least .3.
Of course, absolutely. You're not going around with a .25.
And I'm talking about like the mass-produced ones.
Yeah, of course. Even China would. Yeah, this is a ridiculous claim by this, I don't know, quasi journalist. But the Americans had yet to experience genuine ground combat against the Japanese, but they did see it in. I will mention here the China Marines, as they've been known, people who were stationed in Beijing and specifically in Shanghai, going back to 1931, but as early as going back to just to 1937, would have had a good understanding of what the Japanese were using, what they were capable of, and yeah, intelligence not so good here. Soon Homa would order his forces in northern Luzon to concentrate on the Ligian Gulf. So as you can see here in the northwest part here, that little landing area, where the main attack force was going to commence, and that's going to be for the full invasion of Luzon. The Japanese launched an assault on the economic center of southern Mindanao Island, that being Davao. So do I have to come over here? Is this shown on the map properly? Not so well on this map, unfortunately. Let me just check if I have a better map for this. I don't have a great map for this. Anyway, I'll keep this map up, but it's southeast for those who are wondering. And the city was of particular concern to the Imperial Japanese Navy due to the presence of a U.S. naval base there. And it's pretty close to the Japanese home islands, if you think about it. And it's also close to another Japanese stronghold, which is in the island of Palau. Additionally, securing the southern islands of the Philippines would be strategic because they're like launching pads against the next objectives, which would be the Dutch parts of Borneo. Now, the seaplane tender USS William Preston was attacked on December the 8th by 13 dive bombers, escorted by 9 fighters from the Japanese Navy's carrier Yojo. And in a calculated move, Major General Shizo Sakaguchi and Lieutenant Colonel Toshio Miura led their respective detachments of approximately 5,000 men to land under the cover of darkness, aiming to do a surprise attack on Davao. Davao was guarded by a single regiment of 2,000 Philippine Commonwealth Army soldiers, specifically the 101st Infantry Regiment, led by Lieutenant Colonel Roger Hilsman. Like much of the Philippine Army, this regiment was only partially trained by this time, and they suffered a lot of equipment shortages. At around midnight on the 19th of December, the Japanese naval transports started to arrive, and by about 4 a.m., the Miura detachment landed to the north, while the Sakaguchi detachment made their landing southwest of the city. The Miura detachment encountered a lone machine gun squad that opened fire upon landing, but the Imperial Japanese destroyer quickly silenced them with a shell, eradicating the threat. Despite this, the Miura detachment sustained some casualties. As the defenders resisted tenaciously, Major General Sakaguchi made the decision to commit some of his reserve forces, initially intended for the attack on Yolo, to assault Davao. By midday, both detachments had stormed the city, pushing the Philippine defenders back behind the Davao River. And upon entering Davao, the Japanese soldiers were greeted with cheers from a significant portion of the population who happened to be Japanese, because they happened to be living in the city. Many had already been detained in warehouses since the offset of hostilities. Though battered by the invasion, the Miura detachment would remain in Davao to garrison the area and continue the liberation of Japanese citizens. Meanwhile, the Sakaguchi detachment prepared to launch operations against Yolo, the capital of the Sulu Islands. Just want to check my map. So, Yolo is not highlighted. Oh, sorry. I only had to go south a little bit more to show Davao over here. That's my bad. But Yolo is, it's not marked here, is it? Let me grab another map, one sec. I have, none of my maps actually have it marked. Anyways, it's in the midpoint here of this grouping of islands in the south.
I remember the Philippines is supposed to have like so many islands. Like
There's many islands, yeah. But nine of the predominant islands are what people kind of like think of. Now, once Yolo was captured, they could divert their efforts towards an attack on Tarakan and Dutch Borneo. So this is much further south of the Philippines. Douglas MacArthur's headquarters at this time is in Manila, and he finally regained, equilibrium after the chaotic initial days of the war, during which Luzon's sea and air bases were completely just obliterated by the Japanese. With the imminent threat of a Japanese landing looming, MacArthur began to prepare his forces. The most likely site the Japanese would choose was the Ligian Gulf, located northwest on the main island of Luzon. So I'll just keep going back up here. As we discussed in the previous episode, War Plan Orange 3, under War Plan 5, outlined strategies for defending the Philippines. And this was extensive. It's like 40 years of military planning. The expectation was that the defenders would retreat behind fortified lines that bisected the Bataan Peninsula, a vantage point commanding the sea approaches to Manila Bay. There, they're going to dig in and they're going to wait for rescue, an event that realistically was never going to happen, but they were expected to hold out for as long as possible at this focal point. MacArthur envisioned a different approach, as we already said, and he basically screwed everything up with his attack at the beaches idea, and he was going to do this. So his attack at the beaches idea would require superior air power to be pulled off. He would need highly mobile infantry divisions and a naval fleet for rescue. None of these variables are at play. Historian John Costello...
Not at play, they were not there.
Yeah. Historian John Costello, kind of one of the behemoths of the Pacific War literature out there, he argued, and this is a quote from him, War Plan Orange 3 remained the cornerstone of U.S. military strategy because there simply was no acceptable alternative. Now, with the forces MacArthur had at his disposal, War Plan Orange 3 would have offered the most sensible defensive plan if it had been implemented on time, which should have been at the offset of hostilities. Unfortunately, MacArthur did not execute the plan when he should have. By December the 21st, and we're talking, this is a long time now, MacArthur commanded about 32,000 American troops alongside an estimated 120,000 Filipinos of the Philippine Army. Although the defenders significantly outnumbered the Japanese attackers, most of these forces were undertrained, ill-equipped. The first Japanese troops landing would occur in northern Luzon on December the 10th, where several airfields we already mentioned were taken. Now, the invasion force of the Japanese, it exceeds about 50,000 men. They're very well equipped. They do have light tanks and some heavy artillery, and they're sailing from, Formosa with a formidable fleet of about 48 freighters. And they have camouflage troop ships, and now they're set to land at Ligian Gulf. The estimated arrival dates could be December the 22nd for them. The Iji Masuda, a merchant marine officer on the freighter Arizona Maru, recalled that the invasion convoy, quote, sailed in two long lines extending beyond the horizon in both directions. Now, our American counterpart to this, the Admiral Hart, he's got his American submarine force, as all the other ships have now left the area, and he's expected to deliver heavy punishment upon the Japanese troop transports. But his performance is disappointing to say the least. Although the 29 submarines constituted the largest submarine force ever assembled by the United States, they inflicted little to no damage, and they did not understand what was going on, but there was actually a lot of issues at play. Obviously, faulty torpedoes is kind of the large one. I mean, we can all agree that the Mark 14-15 issue with the American torpedoes, 1/10 of them actually worked. That's going to result in poor performance. But there's actually another issue for these submarines: poor training, inept commanding officers, and bad luck. Compounding their difficulties was the loss of adequate communications, because the low-frequency radio tower at Sangley Point, which is nearby, was taken out by the Japanese. Additionally, the submarine commanders were conditioned to a pre-war doctrine, and this told them that fleet submarines were actually to be used as scouting vessels, and that they were extremely vulnerable to air attacks and anti-submarine attacks. This is quite false, and it's a very peculiar thing to believe at the time. The shallow inland waters around Ligian Gulf also hampered maneuverability for the submarines, but to be honest, you would kind of assume you line up your submarines in the area, you should be quite able to hit the stationary targets when they're doing their landings, but didn't happen. A few B-17s and PBYs flying from Australia tried to inflict damage on the convoy, but they managed to do very minimal damage. Remarkably, the Japanese actually faced greater losses due to choppy seas and high winds, which caused, quite a few of the boats to overturn. Matsuda would recall...
Hey, in fairness, we've seen in the Punic Wars, the Romans lost entire fleets at sea.
And the Mongolians lost their entire two invasion fleets against Japan during the Kamikaze win. So, yeah. The primary source...
Don't underestimate the oceans, man.
Yeah. The primary source, Matsuda, he actually recalled this. It was terribly difficult to load soldiers and supplies on the bobbing boats. Enemy planes struck us at dawn, aiming primarily at the beachheads. Bullets from the strafing planes chased our boats to the shore. Arizona Mato poured fire into the sky. We saw enemy planes spiraling down, trailing smoke. Our ship was rocked by the concussions of exploding bombs and the force of walls of water striking our sides. Excuse me. Nonetheless, most of the ships unloaded successfully, and the landing force began its advance upon Manila. So if you're looking at the map with us, they're landing at this little place that has the Ago written over here, and they're going all the way down to this bay area where Manila is just east of the bay. Is Manila not marked on this map? Wow. I am
believe
going
it's for the
to
airfields.
Yeah, I'm going to open up another map that has it. One sec. Where is this? I believe this is the one. Yeah, this one has it marked down. And you can see.
Have to admit one thing I'm gonna say. The fact that when MacArthur invades the Philippines back in 44, the invasion of Luzon pretty much goes the same way. Like, what is the
Yeah.
priorities?
Exactly. MacArthur, upon discovering that nothing's going well, especially with the submarines, led him to question Admiral Hart. He actually said this quote: "What in the world is the matter with your submarines?" Hart recalled telling him back, Hart recalled that MacArthur is inclined to cut my throat and perhaps the Navy in general, given how much criticism he was getting from MacArthur at the time. With both the submarine force and the air force failing to perform as hoped against the convoys, one would expect MacArthur would now implement War Plan Orange 3 and prepare for a defensive position. Instead, he placed the North Luzon force under the command of General Wainwright due to the landings in the north, and he told them to send some of his best troops, the Philippine Scouts of the 4th Marines and 31st Infantry, to the south. So, just to repeat that, he ordered his best forces to not meet the enemy at the beaches, but to go south, and instead he will send the ill-trained and under-equipped Filipino forces of the Philippine Army to meet the enemy at the beaches. Not a great strategy. 2 Philippine Commonwealth Army divisions were tasked with protecting a 120-mile coastline. With one had artillery, the other one didn't even have any artillery. So it's not a good strategy. Anticipating a landing at the southern end of the Gulf, the Americans positioned the 21st Philippine Division there with artillery batteries. In the northern section was the Philippine 11th Division, supplemented by the 71st Division, which only had 10 weeks of training and a few soldiers who knew how to operate their outdated Enfield rifles. The 26th Cavalry Regiment was stationed on Route 3, 12 miles south of Rosario. Meanwhile, MacArthur's crack troops would remain at Layak Junction as a rearguard. Harold K. Johnson of the 57th Infantry on Luzon, who would later become chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, characterized Arthur's decision to confront the Japanese at Ligian Gulf as a tragic error. Now, the Japanese army easily brushed aside the inexperienced, poorly equipped conscripts of the Philippine Army, not their fault at all, who broke ranks and they would flee. And you simply can't blame them. Artillery units manned by American troops around them were left completely exposed to banzai charges. MacArthur was besieged with requests from field commanders for permission to withdraw at the onset of the engagements. Wainwright dispatched the 11th Division and the 26th Cavalry Regiment to defend the Gulf north of the Mortis, and he also sent a regiment of the 71st Division to San Fernando to prevent the Japanese from advancing from Vigan. Simultaneously, the Japanese 9th Regiment at Bang launched an attack to the north on San Fernando and advanced towards Baguio. Acting swiftly, the Japanese managed to converge around San Fernando, leaving the 71st Regiment in a precarious position, which would force them to retreat back to Baguio. Just making sure my map is showcasing everything I want. It doesn't have all of the points written on it, but this is the best map I got for this one. Excuse me. The speed of the Japanese advance meant that the 71st could neither flank nor prepare their positions in time. By midnight, they were in a full retreat. To the south, forces had landed north of the Mortis, and they were now en route to Rosario, where the Philippine 11th Division met them head-on. Turned into a minor skirmish as the Japanese utilized a tank regiment, the Philippine 11th Division was completely routed by this. Wainwright received reports of the Japanese advancing with light motor vehicles, bicycles, and tanks along the coastal road to Rosario. Now, General Wainwright conducted a commendable defensive campaign amidst all this chaos. I really think he should be commended for it. During all this, he enabled Major General Parker, who's in the south, to, in control of the South Luzon forces, to extricate about 15,000 troops to Bataan. Wainwright requested tank reinforcements to help him halt the Japanese advance towards Manila, but General Sutherland, this is MacArthur's chief of staff and a complete idiot, I would say. I think Sutherland was a moron. Sutherland would just tell him to ask MacArthur and then proceed to block conversations to said MacArthur. Ultimately, MacArthur only dispatched about 5 tanks. These tanks engaged the Japanese on the coastal road to Rosario, pushing the enemy back to the Mortis. However, they were severely damaged by Japanese 47mm anti-tank guns. Alongside this, the 26th Cavalry had to be withdrawn. Consequently, Rosario became a focal point of a lot of the fighting, where the Japanese tanks would eventually break through the cavalry's rear guard, and they inflicted heavy casualties upon them. Following the destruction of about 5 U.S. tanks, by nightfall, Homa had secured Rosario and the immediate area of the Lingayen Gulf. So, within a single day, the Japanese had established a significant beachhead along the Lingayen Gulf coastline, and they would advance north, south, and east from this point. MacArthur's plan for an active defense strategy to thwart the Japanese at the beaches collapsed within a day. Major Le Grande Diller, MacArthur's press officer, you gotta love the fact
It's a
that
code, as you said. It's a code.
Yeah, very important to have a press officer, issued a statement regarding the Japanese landings at Lingayen Gulf. So, the New York Times reported this, based off of what he was saying. Japanese forces wiped out in western Luzon. Now, the United Press made this claim. There has been a 3-day battle with 154 enemy boats sunk. Not a single Japanese soldier had reached the shores. So yeah, as one might expect, MacArthur's press released a lot of false reports that went to the press. And this would not be covered up later, but anyways. So, MacArthur then sees everything's unfolding terribly. It looks really bad on him, so he starts to assign blame to Admiral Thomas Hart, overstating, and while he's putting blame on also Brereton, by the way, he's blaming Brereton, he's blaming Hart. He's also stating that he thinks the Japanese are perhaps up to 100,000 men. It's double the number that's actually attacking him. So he's looking to make himself look less like an idiot.
Anything but him.
Yeah. So Wainwright is compelled to withdraw to the Agno River, and he appeals to MacArthur for his well-trained Philippine division to launch a coordinated attack, to which MacArthur refuses, choosing to hold them in reserve. Despite the chaos, Wainwright managed to delay the Japanese advance by leading his troops in a spirited defense, where he's destroying all the bridges along the way to Manila and also to Bataan. It's over almost 200 bridges are destroyed. Excuse me. By December the 24th, a second Japanese force of 7,000 disembarked at Lamombe, 60 miles southeast of Manila, on Luzon's eastern coast. And I don't think I have from the Ryukyu Islands. I think that's, where that is on my map. This surprise reinforced the peril facing the capital, as 2 Japanese armies were now advancing on Manila. MacArthur dispersed and overstretched his forces, and now they're finding themselves trapped in a pincer movement, while the Japanese consolidated their hold on Luzon, marching towards Manila. From his headquarters in Manila, MacArthur began to radio General Marshall, asking if U.S. carriers could begin, sending pursuit planes within range. Yeah, within range of the Philippines. So here's a quote. Can I expect anything along that line? Marshall responded, a blunt response. According to the Navy, this is impossible. And MacArthur, you'll have to rely on the planes that you have. So, the planes that he had just sent to Australia by this point. Excuse me. Realizing that holding off the Japanese without deploying his 3 properly trained combat regiments and, still refusing to commit them was proving ineffective, MacArthur ultimately declared the capital city of Manila an open city after 40 hours of colossal setbacks. So for those who don't know, when you claim a city is open, you're hoping the enemy will not use artillery or air attacks upon it. And he did so
The intention is also that you're not also going to be using it as a military base. Because it's supposed to be
Exactly.
like,
You're giving it up.
it's freeing itself from the conflict, right?
So yeah, in the Italian campaign of World War II, this was a huge part of kind of this thing. It's a much more delicate situation because you have Rome, but you also have the Vatican, and technically both the Axis and the Allies agreed not to hit the Vatican. So both sides were also like, oh, we should probably not fight in Rome, and they kind of both agreed to this. It is a rather weird story, but Rome was declared an open city eventually too. So it's a similar situation, a little bit more complex, mind you. But MacArthur also instructed Brereton to send the remaining B-17s out of harm's way. He said, just go south. You can do me much more good with the bombers you have left if you just go south. So he does that. And as he did so, he finally said, let's put War Plan Orange 3 into effect. Something that should have been put into effect like December the 8th. But anyways. 75,000 troops comprising 15,000. Exactly. So you got 75,000 troops, 15,000 of them Americans, 60,000 Filipinos, along with what was 26,000 refugees. All are fleeing to Bataan now. It's a logistical nightmare. So you look at the Philippines, let me zoom out. This is just showing like Luzon and a little bit of the south here, but you have to imagine all the other islands, they're screwed. There's no moving outside of Luzon. The main chunk of this island is where there's actually retreating. But all of across this island are units with war materials. It's a logistical nightmare. Should have never happened because War Plan Orange 3 should have been implemented at the start. Situation was quite dire. Caught all the forces in massive pincers everywhere. Brigadier General Charles Drake's supply units, because this poor individual's in charge of the logistics here, he's desperately scrambling to move tons of food, ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, everything he can to the Bataan Peninsula. And he's being attacked by air, by Japanese forces, by armored forces. He himself lacks vehicles to do this. He has insufficient personnel to be able to move all this. And he has the worst thing of all, a lack of time. So Wainwright's North Luzon force, the main one at this point, trying to delay the enemy, fought wherever they could to delay the Japanese advances. And they established 5 delaying positions in central Luzon. So if you look over here on the map, D1 to D5 are those delaying positions where he's trying to hold them back. But the Japanese are also coming from the south, and that's where Parker's men are running for their lives. As a result of all the chaos, only a fraction of the much-needed war materials would actually reach the peninsula. The pre-invasion construed plan for the fortified defenses of Bataan was, pretty much neglected through all this. MacArthur and his staff ultimately abandoned their headquarters, and they sailed across the bay to Corregidor Island, where there's a much more formidable HQ. The Filipino president, Manuel Quezon, who was suffering from tuberculosis at the time, made the painful decision to accompany MacArthur, fearing for the fate of his people. Because now he looks like a collaborator. He could have maybe pitched this as, we'll just throw our lot in with the Japanese. The Japanese were actually grooming Quezon by just stipulating, they're like, oh, you're going to be part of the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. To which Quezon said, I never knew this was a thing. I didn't agree to be part of this. The Japanese are like, well, you are. You're part of this. As they did.
It kind of like, he's like, that Rogue One where Gina was like, congratulations, you have been liberated, even though she had no idea she was being liberated.
It's exactly that meme, yeah. Allied forces, they're traveling north on Route 3 in long, disorganized convoys, trucks, buses, jeeps, and ox carts and stuff. They're sharing the road with thousands of civilians who are fleeing for their lives on foot. War Plan Orange 3 required that the Bataan Peninsula be stocked with sufficient food and supplies to enable 43,000 troops to endure a Japanese siege estimated for about 6 months. However, they would have enough provisions for about a 30-day siege because of MacArthur. One thing in favor of the Americans was the Japanese were actually caught very much off guard by this retreat. Coordinated strafing attacks by the Japanese air forces on the densely packed roads to Bataan could have been an absolute massacre, but they weren't. For the first time throughout the entire campaign, there was actually not many enemy planes overhead, for the most part. Moreover, the Japanese had opportunities to destroy key bridges along the way to Bataan, potentially trapping most of the American forces fleeing for their lives, but they failed to do so. To complicate matters, MacArthur assigned Major General Parker the commander of the Southern Luzon Force, to lead the Bataan defenses. And they allocated the Southern Luzon Force to Brigadier General Albert Jones. Jones immediately devised a plan to delay a potential Japanese advance through the mountains towards Manila, while concurrently conducting an aggressive withdrawal into Bataan. But before this consolidation, the Japanese under Commander Mayoka had disembarked at 3 different locations in southern Luzon. Major General Parker had ordered the 1st and 51st Divisions to move to Legazpi to counter the invasion, but he now had to watch commands to coordinate the retreat to Bataan. So you have to imagine he is trying to delay the Japanese and attack them with counterattacks, but he's also trying to withdraw, do a fighting withdrawal for that matter, all of his men to Bataan. And if you look at the map and you look where he's going, it's kind of a nightmare because you can easily get trapped. Now, in southern Luzon, the 3 Japanese military groups were invading, consolidating their positions to advance on Manila because that's their objective. With War Plan Orange 3 now suddenly initiated, MacArthur ordered Jones to collaborate effectively with Wainwright for both of them to retreat to Bataan. If one retreated too quickly, you basically screwed over the other, as you can imagine. Jones established his main defensive line in the town of Los Banos, as his Filipino forces were heavily pressed back by the Japanese at the Legazpi area. Meanwhile, Wainwright began his retreat to his second line of defense, so that would be D2, stretching from Zambales, which has some mountains, to the town of San Jose. On the 25th of December, supporters from the Sulu Islands were also invaded, as General Sakaguchi departed Davao back on the 23rd of December. He captures the city and its crucial airfield with little to no resistance. Now, Sakaguchi could use this location as a base of operations against the Dutch East Indies. From about December the 25th to the 28th, Manila was bombed despite it being declared an open city. Homa's forces would capture the towns of Carman, Tayug, San Manuel, and San Quintin, but they were unable to root out the retreating Allied forces, so they're unable to capture many. On the 27th, Wainwright had successfully established his second line of defense. Even in the complete disarray, the South Luzon force managed to withdraw and implemented some leapfrogging tactics to cross some bridges to reach Bataan. Now, I want to just mention one little thing here because it's an interesting tidbit of information, and it is alleged. I can't prove much of this because the way I found this information seemed to be from someone who had a bone to pick with MacArthur, by the way. Allegedly, on December the 28th, as the Japanese were closing in on Manila, MacArthur telephoned the mayor of Manila, Vargas, from Corregidor, and he asked him to purchase $35,000 worth of shares in the Lepanto Mining Company on his behalf. Vargas executed the transaction.
Mining.
Yeah. Vargas executed the transaction the next day and would later recall that this single decision during the critical stages of the Japanese invasion of the Philippines would make MacArthur a millionaire by the war's end. Just saying, it's alleged information. People might be screaming at me that this is slanderous. Alleged information again. On December the 28th, the situation was deteriorating rapidly for the defenders of the Philippines. The implementation of War Plan Orange 3 had come far too late, leading to a disastrous withdrawal to Bataan. 75,000 troops comprising, as I said, 15,000 Americans, 60,000 Filipinos, along with all the refugees. They're lucky if the majority of them got there, but certainly their war materials were not going to all get there. And
not to mention
quite
supplies.
disorderly. Yeah.
I mean, what's the point of being besieged if you don't have food?
Exactly.
Just saying.
Now, by December the 29th, the Japanese had now secured the towns of Tarlac and Bagobon. On the 30th, General Homa began to comprehend MacArthur's strategic movements. And he's starting to understand what they were doing, that they're running to Bataan. So he dispatched the 7th Tank Regiment as a vanguard to try and swiftly capture critical bridges and junctions leading into Bataan, thus aiming to cut off the retreating American troops and the civilians. The 7th Tank Regiment was directed towards the vital road junction at Paredel, just due north of Manila, where the twin steel bridges of Calumpit, which is over the Pampanga River, could be attacked. It was essential, actually, for the Southern Luzon forces' passage to get to Bataan. So Parker's forces needed to cross over from this bridge. A couple of well-placed bombs on these bridges would sever the lines of communications for the Northern and Southern Luzon forces. Wainwright's third line of defenses eventually fell, leading the Japanese to capture San Miguel. Now Wainwright was compelled to establish a final line of defenses stretching from Fort Stolzenberg to Sibyl Springs. If the Japanese breached this last line, San Fernando would be exposed to an attack where countless civilians were actually still fleeing
So
for their lives.
D5.
Yeah. The 7th Tank Regiment approached Gaipan, merely a short distance from this last line of American defenses. By the 31st of December, the 7th Tank Regiment broke through this final defensive line, getting within proximity to Balang, situated just before Parendel. Concurrently, the Japanese forces were pushing past the breach defenses towards San Fernando. Now, Wainwright was forced to make kind of a stand in San Fernando, or else he risked the Japanese cutting off Bataan from the remaining fleeing forces. 1 second. Now, the Southern Luzon force under General Jones, because let's remember he was actually tagging in for Parker, they reached the Cannon-Put Steel bridges, and while his forces were crossing them, he dispatched 2 tank platoons to engage the Japanese tanks at Balang, hoping to provide enough time for his defenders to get over. The American tanks managed to destroy 7 Japanese tanks without sustaining any casualties, successfully delaying their advance. Because, let's be honest, despite the fact the Japanese have many tanks, they're not quite good tanks when compared to other tanks, such as the Americans. At this moment, if the Japanese air forces had struck any of these bridges...
Maybe they're better than the Italian tanks.
Actually, that would be a great episode. If Japan and Italy did fight during World War II, and that is going to be a future episode I'm going to do. It's a weird story. But anyways, if their Fiats attacked the Honda tanks, it's a battle of whose tanks are shittier. I think the Japanese would still win, but I would have to look into it. But it'd be a fun episode.
Yep. I don't think the cappuccino machines are still winning.
They're not going to probably pull through that one. The U.S. tanks, as I said, they managed to destroy a lot of these Japanese tanks. They kind of push them back a little bit. But during all of this, if the Japanese Air Forces had destroyed any of these bridges, it would have cut off an enormous amount of retreating American forces and Filipinos. By January the 1st, the IGA 48th Division, leading the advance, understood the urgency, and they appealed to Japanese air commanders to start bombarding the bridges. However, this request was dismissed, possibly because the air commanders knew most forces had already crossed at this point. On that same day, the Southern Luzon force, having successfully moved everyone across the bridges, detonated the structures behind them, thus avoiding what could have been, a catastrophic entrapment of their entire force. By the 2nd of January, Japanese troops entered Manila unopposed. Storefronts were boarded up, gangs of local looters exploited the chaos, as crowds of civilians stood by silently. At the home of the American High Commissioner, the Japanese lowered the American flag, and a Japanese sailor ground his feet into it, replacing it with the rising sun, as the band played Kimi Gayo. General Homa erroneously believed that once his forces occupied Manila, the capital of the Philippines, the battle would be over. That's what he thought. And he was quite slow to recognize that his true prize had just escaped to Bataan, and that victory was not secured. So after capturing Manila, Homa faced an unexpected dilemma. Japanese High Command ordered the 48th Division, his very best soldiers, to leave the Philippines to assist in the invasion of Java. However, Homa felt he still needed them for mopping up operations. The 48th Division had been commanded on December the 30th to advance and seal off Bataan from anyone attempting to escape. So between January the 2nd and the 4th, American forces scrambled to open a road from San Fernando to Dinalfian, excuse me for mispronouncing that one, which lays at the neck of the peninsula, just as the Southern Luzon force was pushing through to reach Bataan as well. It took an incredible effort to keep this narrow road open, allowing the Southern Luzon force to make it into Bataan safely. An incredible achievement. The 48th Division reached the defensive lines just in front of Bataan, where Homa requested to retain the division for at least an additional month, but he would be denied. Consequently, the 48th was replaced by the 65th Summer Brigade from Formosa, a unit comprising 7,700 men.
Summer Brigade?
Oh, that's why they're called the Summer Brigade. They're mostly older, undertrained, and ill-equipped, frontline, not frontline duty kind of guys. This is like this is like the National Guard, basically, kind of troops. Their commander was Lieutenant General Akira Nara, who was very unprepared for the circumstances that he was going to be presented. On the night of January the 5th, Nara led his troops towards the front on foot, with exhausted men struggling after crossing over 184 destroyed bridges. They approached Bataan, now filled with 15,000 Americans and 65,000 Filipino troops. The defenders
With
were
a lot of
faced.
civilians.
Yes. The defenders faced a catastrophic food situation. Starting on the 5th, MacArthur placed his troops on half rations, but in reality, they received much less than this. His mismanagement of War Plan Orange 3 resulted in severe logistical failures in supplying Bataan. Troops were going to be surviving on about 1,000 to 1,500 calories per day, and this is at the beginning. By the end of the January, they would only have about 11 days worth of meat and fish, 6 days of flour, 4 days of vegetables. Over 50 million bushels of rice stored in central Luzon had not been moved to Bataan due to his blunder. Could have sustained MacArthur's forces for up to 4 years if they somehow could defend. Wainwright confided in one Major Trap Chapnell of the 26th Cavalry, saying this quote, "I don't worry about the Japs. I worry about the Chows." So, if you think about it,
An army on its stomach, so
yeah, these American troops are not going to have food, so they're going to be in unhealthy states, more open to getting diseases, and like 80% of them are going to succumb to malaria and other tropical diseases. So yeah, it's not a good situation by any means.
I think
Alongside-
Greg, you would attest to that in a lot of your other videos, right? Like the Aleutian Islands campaign, for example, like the state of nutrition the Japs were getting, that ensure that their combat effectiveness is reducing rapidly.
Exactly.
It's the same logic.
Now, alongside the food and the disease issues, there was another problem, that of resentment. MacArthur ordered larger rations for the American troops in Bataan, and that wouldn't sit very well with the Filipino forces, as you can imagine. One Antonio Aquino, the son of sugar baron Benigno Aquino, risked his life swimming 1.5 miles from Bataan to Corregidor to warn President Quezon of the growing rift between the American and Filipino forces. This is what he reported. "We feel we should have the same rations as the Americans." As you would imagine, Antonio noted that the rift was not only between Americans and Filipinos, but amongst American units. MacArthur had ordered his chief of staff, our brilliant friend General Sutherland, to remove the 4th Marines from general recommendations for presidential unit citations, arguing, "The Marines have had enough glory in World War I."
Is it just because they're Navy units?
Yeah,
I think that's the
because
main
Navy.
reason.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, the Navy also hated him back, so all right. It's an equal relation.
MacArthur's
They are
forces
his greatest enemy.
MacArthur's forces dug in with what's going to be called the Abuque-Malbin Line, which cuts across the very northern end of the peninsula, across the flank of the dormant volcano Mount Netib. MacArthur was receiving clear signals from Washington that he should not expect much in the way of any timely rescue. And he told his troops on January the 15th this quote, "Help is on the way from the United States. Thousands of troops and hundreds of planes are being dispatched. No further retreat is possible. We have more troops in Bataan than the Japanese have thrown against us. Our supplies are ample. A determined defense will defeat the enemy's attack. I call upon every soldier in Bataan to fight in his assigned position, resisting every attack. This is the only road to salvation. If we fight, we will win. If we retreat, we will be destroyed."
I get why he would make such a speech. You got to keep the morale up for your men. But
So MacArthur, who's supposed to be sitting on about 6 months of war provisions for 45,000 men or so in Bataan, he's sitting on about 30 days worth, and I mean he's going to be rationing the hell out of that. They call the guys who fight in this the battling bastards of Bataan for good reason. It was horrendous, but they did exceedingly well. We're going to be covering the battle for Bataan, which is going to take some time. That's the meat and potatoes of this campaign. That's why I've kind of rushed the. We're calling this the invasion, but a lot of people would break this into the initial invasions, the coastline, and then the attack on Manila and the retreat to Bataan should have been their own things. But I thought the meat and potatoes is going to be the battle for Bataan, and the next few episodes we're going to look at that. The last episode will be the fall of Corregidor.
I think it's quite evident, right? Because most of the campaign is focused on the defense of the Bataan Peninsula.
Exactly.
And it was just kind of, almost, I would say, relatively anticlimactic the way the rest of Luzon fell in comparison.
Yes, of course. Yeah. We will also be covering the fall of all of the different parts of the Philippine Islands, which happens throughout the campaign itself. There is some interesting actions there. It's a little bit of guerrilla action, we might talk about. But we're not going to talk about everything that goes till 45. For example, the campaign to retake the Philippines will be an entire other series, for that matter, and that's a lot longer. That's extensive episodes, to say the least. But before we let you go, I just want to say, if you'd like to further support the channel, please consider checking out our YouTube membership or our Patreon account at www.patreon.com/Pacific War Channel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights to the subjects I will tackle next. Gaurav, thank you for being a host. For being a hostage to this situation.
I'll return the favor soon. It's a future episode.
Yes.
Don't worry about that.
We're going to be covering the Battle of the Atlantic soon. That's going to be exciting. So there's a lot coming. For those of you who are watching us on YouTube, please comment things you want to hear about in the future. We're not exclusively to the Pacific War. We cover any history you can possibly imagine. 100 Years' War, for example. Let us know. And until next time, bye.